Now boarding our first class Ultra Gold passengers. Welcome into Other People's Shoes, the podcast that takes you on an extraordinary journey through the lives of others, where empathy knows no bounds. Your host, Neil Matthews, is absolutely thrilled that you're here. Please take your seat as we're about to take flight into season 16. Be sure to hold on tight, because Take Flight isn't just about the skies above. It's about the depths within. We'll dive headfirst into the stories of those who faced turbulence and yet found the strength to rise above it all. So grab your headphones and get ready to soar with us as we launch into season 16. Thank you for flying with us. Buckle up and let's take flight.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining us. As Jessica said, season 16. Holy smokes, here we are. And here we go as we take off into this new season. I am really excited about our guest today. Let me tell you, it's not every day we actually get in the cockpit of a naval aviator. Maybe we'll lose that love and feeling. Maybe he'll help us find our wings of fire. Maybe he'll, bring in Paul McCartney and the band Wings. Who knows? Maybe we'll just even time travel back to that show, Wings. How many more Wings references can we make? Let's see. Let's take off from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. I think where the flight really, truly started. But help me welcome in my new friend, Vincent. Vincent, how are you today?
I'm great, Neil. Thank you. This is quite the lead-in. I don't know if I measure up.
Oh, come on. Don't eject on us already, but I'm ching. That was my poor attempt. That was a really good joke, I felt like.
It was
Did it land? Okay.
Ooh, yes. It took flight and landed just great. Oh boy. We're off to an auspicious start here,
This
Neil.
could get corny real quick. But Vincent, truly, I am, as I mentioned, pre-flight. There's a new word we could use for the season. I was excited to meet you, and I am excited to meet you because just up the road from you is Camp Pendleton Marine Corps Base. You've probably been through there a time or two, maybe driven past.
I've driven by several times. I've stopped a time or two, mostly just to fill up on their cheaper gas. No, never stationed there. Yeah, a lot of Marines here in San Diego, if you include up there at Camp Pendleton, but also Miramar. We've got a bunch of Navy here as well, and even a token Air Force Reserve base. I think we've got something for everyone.
Sounds like Space Force is moving in, I heard. I'm just kidding. I have no idea about that. It seems like they should.
Space Force base is up at LAX, I think.
Yeah, so as I mentioned to you, growing up, it was not uncommon to be out playing soccer in elementary school or on the swing set or on the jungle gym or playing Foursquare and hearing Super Cobras flying over us or swinging out on the swing set and seeing Amtraks coming in off the ocean. It was just cool to see as a kid.
Well, I'm glad you think it's cool, Neil, because right after San Francisco Fleet Week, you get some quite different opinions. And something I sometimes say to them is, did you happen to catch the markings on the side? Was it American? Okay, good. I'll leave it at that.
I think patriotism is a lost art. It needs to come back in a major way, in my opinion. So help us with this, Vincent, because I love to lead off every show truly with this question, and that's this, is what size shoes do you wear?
I wear a size 13, which if you ask me is pretty good for someone who's only 6 foot tall and about 193. Quite filled out the way I could have. I've been 13 since high school.
My favorite question that follows that, is there a style or brand that you like more than another?
No, I guess anything that'll let me do what I need to do. Shoes are somewhat utilitarian. I've got some that I use. In fact, the ones I'm wearing right now are to exercise because I went to the gym earlier. The pair I was wearing last week were helping me not slip on all the rocks in the East Walker River while I was fly fishing. Shoes are just like people, many different size, shapes, colors, purposes. And
I just know for me, people always tease me that I'm a shoe nut, and I've been accused of being a shoe, shoe judgment has come up on the show a time or two because I judge people based on what they wear. Like if you're wearing Clarks or if you're wearing New Balance, I might throw rocks at you. And I think that's very offensive. I don't throw rocks at people.
Do you commonly judge people, Neil? Because if so, maybe
on
we
their
can turn
shoes,
the script here.
On their shoes, I kind of, full disclosure, I kind of do judge a little bit.
We all do.
Andy Dufresne says you can judge a lot by a man by the shoes he wears.
Oh,
Shawshank Redemption. Right. So there we go.
Indeed. Great movie.
Here's my question that I really want to get your opinion on. Now, this is from our good friend Leonardo da Vinci. You've heard of that guy, I hope.
I think so. We might be related. I don't know.
He's attributed to this quote, and I want to just jump right in with this quote. And here it is. It says, "Once you've tasted flight, you will never walk on the earth without your eyes turned to the sky. For there you have been, and there you will always return.
That's very good. I think that captures sort of a thesis of mine that I've had on my own podcast, the Fighter Pilot Podcast, where I say to my guests, we seem like we're related. And I've had guests from India, America, Australia, various places in Europe. And I think we all have that same thing in common, Neil. We've experienced something that a lot of people do. It just sort of gets into the fiber of our beings. Feel at home in the clouds as much maybe as we do on the ground. We long to do it. Now, that being said, some people want to do it all the time. Others like me are just more, I appreciate it when I do it. There's no craving. Just now I was eating lunch out on my front porch and I watched a little airplane fly by over the San Diego Bay. And I thought, well, that guy's probably having a good time. I didn't feel like I needed to go suddenly transport and join him. I just, I appreciate when I do go. And I think some people would go every second if they could.
When you talk about being a fighter pilot and you talk about being up in the air, it's different than leisure flying like you were just describing, than maybe in combat when someone's actually shooting at you with the intention to harm not only you, but harm your aircraft to get you out of their quote unquote airspace. There's a different dynamic there, of course, I would imagine. Do you remember that first feeling being up in the plane, that first going up? Do you remember what that was like in any way?
Very, very first flight. I think I might have been 12 or 13. I lived near Pismo Beach on the central coast of California. I think we'd helped wash a gentleman's Cessna and he took us for a little ride and even gave a little logbook and with a Polaroid picture of me. At that point, I had two older brothers and we flew remote control airplanes and we went to air shows and we loved anything aviation. And I think I just remember being mystified, if you will, and just like, this is amazing. Everything about it was new, even the sensation in my ears and my stomach. There was that experience, but also when I had my very first familiarization flight as a Navy flight student, I remember it being a little more fearful, not Neil because of my safety, but because I wanted to perform well, because your performance affected whether you selected a particular platform at the end of that first phase of training. I knew it was on me and I knew the instructor was behind me evaluating me. There was a bit of trepidation there, not for my personal safety.
I actually hate to fly. I truly do. The takeoff.
Do you mostly fly like through big airports and have to deal with the crush of people and all? Because that doesn't qualify. That's just a negative experience because people are just rude these days.
I get what you're saying. For me, like my first flight experience was, I think I was around 7 or 8. We were flying actually from Portland, Oregon to San Diego, down in your neck of the woods. My dad was still in the Marine Corps, going back to Camp Pendleton from visiting my grandmother for the summer. So I remember getting on the airplane. It was Alaska Airlines. I do remember that. My brother leans over to me and my mom's best friend from high school had packed us snacks for the flight. Mind you, it was probably a 2-hour flight, maybe an hour and a half. I mean, it wasn't very long. Oregon to California is not very far.
Right.
Prior to takeoff, my brother says, hey, I bet you can't finish these gummy bears before we take off. And I was like, challenge accepted. Little brother is going to win this. And so I downed him, obviously, as fast as I could. And then the next thing I know, I'm throwing them up. Found myself in first class, sitting next to stewardess. Got to meet the captain, shook his hand. He gave me some wings. It was cool. That was my first flight experience. I think every time after that, now as an adult, I think, well, one, don't eat anything, Neil, especially gummy bears. There were some traumatic events that took place there. The takeoff for me is always a struggle. That once we're in the air, the noise kind of reverberating, woo, woo, woo sound. And I'm doing that injustice, I'm sure.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Was it good? And then just the crowdedness of it. I'm a little taller than you are. I'm like 6'2". I'm slimming down. I'm a comfortable 230-ish, we'll say. It's just a cramped space and I'm a fidgeter. And so that's why I'm not a fan of flying. However, if you took me up in like, say, a F-14 Tomcat, I'm thinking of something with the dual seater. I mean, that would be fun to me. So help me understand why you love it so much and I don't love it so much.
First off, you got to get with the times there, mister. It's not a stewardess. It's a flight attendant.
My apologies. But back in that day, it was probably a stewardess.
That's probably true. Let's see. Secondly, yeah, I mean, a big crowded airplane, if you're a taller dude, look, I'm an airline pilot. I know what it's like because we have to deadhead a lot, which is, in other words, riding in the back. Like I said, I don't know if it's just society is different or what, it's not always that pleasant. I get it. Thirdly, I can't take you in an F-14 for a couple reasons. Number one, I never flew it. Number two, you would need to know what you're doing in the back seat. And number three, they don't exist anymore unless we go steal one from another country, which has been chronicled lately in a movie. And there's only one country flying them. But if I could take you up in my 2-seat F-18, then yeah, I'd probably continue your negative schema around flying, Neil, because I would, you saw the movie Armageddon? Remember that big gruff guy? I'm going to spin you and bank you and make you throw up. And sure enough, everybody does.
That's what I envision of you doing to me right now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Why wouldn't I? You had a somewhat negative experience at the beginning and you didn't have enough of a positive experience after to change it. So that is who you are. My oldest brother, one time my parents bought a giant case of kiwis and he sat and ate a bunch of kiwis, so many that he got sick and now he hates kiwis. I think the same thing for you is you just might need a positive experience, or maybe you're old enough, and I'm not calling you old, that at this point, maybe that's just how you're going to be till you die.
And so that's where I'm at. Anytime I get in a plane, I have this like panic attack. I have to get almost meditative, Zen-like, not focus on looking outside. I just get weirded out. Again, that's why I was excited to talk to you.
Okay.
Maybe in some way you could calm my fears or help me understand what I need to do with flying anxiety. And maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe there are others out there who have struggled with this and they're like, man, this is the moment that we get to know how to break that.
Oh gosh,
Vincent can
I'm
help
not the
us.
expert.
Well, I know you're not.
I'm not the expert.
You've done
on that.
it enough that I feel like you can maybe give us some tips or pointers.
Let me ask you a question. Do you find the source of your anxiety the actual flying, or the being cooped up in a big tube, or being so close to people that you don't know? Like if you were the only person on the airplane, can you imagine yourself in the same?
I think it's the tube, and I think it's the act of it. The people I don't care about. You're never going to be not around people. You go to Costco, you go anywhere, you're rubbing shoulders, you're bumping elbows with people.
Well, I refer to my earlier statement. If you don't already fly fish, you need to go find the East Walker or some other places where you can try, Neil, because you can get away from people. I know. I spent a couple weeks on a trip in September, and I spent one whole day up in the Sierra Nevada mountains where I didn't see a soul. I never spoke a word to anyone. Kind of great.
I love people. I love finding out. This is the podcast side of me that comes out. And again, nothing. I'm not throwing rocks at you saying you hate people. That's not what I'm saying.
All right.
But I guess for me, that's not where I'm at. Like the people don't bug me. It's the act of it and then the crampedness. Yes.
Well, so first off, this might not be the best recommendation, but it is a recommendation. So both airports and airplanes, particularly Alaska and others, have these different places where they dispatch these certain liquids. One comes out of a little thing that sticks up out of the bar. You pull the little tab, it fills up your glass. You sit there and you enjoy it. It's bubbly, it's gold, or it could be other colors. And you might find if you had one or two of those that you might be more relaxed. And then you get on the airplane and the stewardess, as you say, could also supply you, maybe at a cost, depending on your class of seating, with some more liquid encouragement. So not the greatest thought. It is a thought, Neil. So something to consider. That's one legal way to do it. There are non-legal ways as well that I do not condone. So I won't mention any of those. No, I'm a logical person. I'm not really much of an emotional person. I think about the fact that at my airline alone, Neil, we have over 3,000 flights a day. And everybody says, 99% should be good enough. Well, what would that be at public math suddenly? 99% of 3,000. Is that like 30 or 3? Anyway, whatever it is. That would be like if that many didn't make it, if 1% didn't, then you'd have that many crashes a day. But when's the last time you heard about an airline crash? I mean, it's almost 100%. It's not 100%. And you certainly do hear about it when something happens. That's because it's so infrequent. There are so many flights among all the major airlines every day. And the vast, vast, vast majority of them have absolutely nothing other than maybe an occasional unruly or passenger, or you're late or something, a little bit of turbulence. It is a very safe activity. I would argue it's safer than driving. When I'm Los Angeles based and my trips start and end in either Orange County, John Wayne Airport, or LAX itself, I always say once I land, I'm like, well, now comes the dangerous part. And that is I have to drive home. If you're a logical person like I am, you could look at it from that point of view. If you're a physics type of person, you can look at it from the engineering side, which is these aircraft are amazingly constructed with redundant systems and wings that are big enough. And oh, by the way, not just barely big enough, but with a margin of safety big enough so that the flaps are down at a certain speed, but in fact, they could be put down faster or slower if necessary. And so we operate right in the heart of the envelope to make it as pleasant and as safe as possible. So the emotional side of it, I don't know that I can speak to too well. I mean, all it takes is one bad gummy bear experience or someone who in a crash or something dreadful, and you might not ever get over it.
Yeah, especially the gummy bear part. That was...
I love gummy bears, by the way.
That was a little unnecessary. This is why I was excited, is because I think you're giving us some insight that most people don't get. I feel like we're getting a view inside the cockpit.
Okay, sure.
You mentioned that you're now flying commercial from the sound of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, prior to that, you did some military service in the Navy.
In the Navy.
In
That's
the
right.
Navy.
They have a
For
song about
copyright
it.
reasons, we can't play that song by the Village People.
Aw.
But I know. I'm a huge Top Gun fan. I loved Maverick, the second iteration of that movie, really.
Mhm.
How much did Top Gun wreck this for me? And I'm okay. I'm prepared. Wreck this for me. How much did Top Gun get right? How much did Top Gun get wrong? I know we probably don't have a ton of time to go over every intimate detail, but how much did they really get right and how much did they get wrong?
That was going to be my first question back to you is how much time do we have? So are we talking Top Gun or Top Gun Maverick or yes, both?
Let's go Top Gun because that was really what got me excited about Miramar, got me excited about, Flight Town, and of course Maverick and Goose. I think everyone on the planet loves that movie. And if you don't, you're not an American. I'm just going to say that.
Well, but it also was the 80s when you look at it.
Come on,
the
it was
20s.
the 80s. Yes, I know. Come on now.
Because let's think about it. It's as far back from us now as when it came out, World War II was. So think about that. Sorry, dude. At any rate, all right, so I don't have a list in front of me, but just off the top of my head, what they got right. Let's start with that. They filmed real flying. So the flying was gorgeous. Cinematography was good. Top Gun at that time was indeed at Naval Air Station Miramar in San Diego. Students went as part of their first tours like the Maverick and Goose were in that squadron. And the training is difficult. And let's see, what else is there? Okay, there's probably more. So if I think of others, and call signs and the A4 was really, that's the one that Viper was flying, was really one of the aggressor aircraft, if you will. And there wasn't a helmet law in 1986 either. So that was easy.
Because Tom Cruise was on his Ninja not wearing a helmet, but yet he wore a helmet in the aircraft.
In both movies.
In both movies, yes.
Yeah, and the second one, and then he goes blowing through security. Meanwhile, the Admiral has to stop at the security gate.
Which is hilarious.
We'll get to that one next. What did they get wrong? Oh boy. A lot of the interpersonal drama, I would say, was wrong. It was way too fricative. I don't know if that's a real word, but I like using it.
I like it. I'm going to use it. Can I use it?
If it's not, I'm going to coin it. And but you have to pay me a penny every time you use it.
Fair enough.
Way too much competition, way too much angst, at least from my experience. And I'm only going to speak from that experience. In reality, for example, when I was in flight school, it was like playing golf. And I don't play golf, but the way I understand golf is if you and I are out there, Neil, we both are going to do our best. And if your best is better than my best, well, then you win, sort of. We're not going to compete, let's say. So at flight school, we all did our best. And in the end, they ranked us according to our best. But I didn't undercut you in order for me, my best to be better than your best. In fact, I encouraged you. You do your best, I'll do mine, and we'll see how it stacks out. And I feel like the rest of the Navy is more like that than what was depicted in the movie. Some of the flying that I said was so real and so good had to be manipulated in order to be more compelling for the viewer. There's one scene where like clear out ice, I'm going to take the shot. It's when he ends up in the flat spin. Those guys are in such close formation. They were like Blue Angels. And the only way they could get everybody on the screen was to do that. Otherwise the A4 would just be a tiny dot. So that part was a little bit fake. The love part story, I don't know. I met my wife before I went to Top Gun, so I don't know of anyone. Actually, that's not true. I have a friend who met a lady who came through Top Gun as like a contractor, sort of, and they're happily married. Big shout out to Yuzul. The ejection, I guess, was real. The flat spin being a big deal, and the fact that you were supposed to, in the F-14, blow the canopy before you ejected. Otherwise, it could, in fact, get caught up in the spot there. So that was real. Some of the flying story, if you will, and the hard deck. Oh, he's going for the hard deck. Well, the filming shows him down between the mountains anyway. The volleyball.
Don't wreck the volleyball. Don't wreck the volleyball.
Oh, no. The volleyball scene was brilliant.
It was brilliant.
Because if I'm dating in 1986 and my date rolls her eyes when I say we're going to Top Gun, well, then all of a sudden, if I may generalize here, she's like, oh, wow, wait a minute. Is that sufficient? I'm going to get myself in trouble here.
Yeah,
soon
don't get yourself in trouble. Hate mailing your show. I still have a buddy to this day in my phone as Mav. I refer to him as such. He likewise to me, Goose. My guys at work, every Friday, they watch Top Gun. That's their tradition. Their office area is actually called the Danger Zone. When I started working here, I was like, what is the deal with the Top Gun? And then I happened to come in on a Friday to set up my office. Sure enough, they're watching Top Gun. I was like, what are you guys doing? They go, we watch Top Gun every Friday. And I said, you're kidding me. They go, no, year round, Top Gun every Friday. That's what we do. It's tradition. And so I'm like, okay. So throughout the day on Friday, I'm kind of working my way through the shop and I'll walk through their area. And it never fails. Every single Friday, it seems like I walk in right as Goose is in the flat spin with Maverick, and I get teary-eyed because in high school, I couldn't handle that because I was Goose and I die in the movie Top Gun. I know I don't. Anthony Edwards does. My persona.
Yeah.
And to this day, Goose's wife in the movie, Meg Ryan, her name is Carol. My buddy Mav will call my wife Carol, not Elizabeth. He calls her Carol to this day. He'll ask me, hey, how's Carol? And it takes me a second. I'm like, who thanks? I'm like, oh, right. My wife in the movie. Yes. I think so many times in Hollywood, we think, man, they got it all right, or none of it's right. It's this paradigm either way. And so it is good to know that they did get, in fact, some of it right. And so, again, it wrecked it for me a little bit, but it's okay.
I don't know that maybe smart people like you do, Neil, and I don't mean to both blow too much sunshine here for you, but also denigrate others. But I think the reality is most people don't actually have that conscious thought. I think what they do is a week later, if something comes up about military aviation, they have an image in their brain they don't even know was formed. And they say, oh yeah, those guys are a bunch of cocky a-holes. Or, oh, they fly in the danger zone. Or they ride motorcycles without helmets or whatever. I don't think it's a conscious thought. I think it just forms their opinion because let's face it, at least here in the West, much of our understanding of anything is spoon-fed to us, whether it's through social media these days, not so much in 1986, or the news, God help us, I try to avoid it, or movies. You have an opinion formed on that and that becomes your reality.
I think you're absolutely right. Is what's so scary about our world right is what are we being fed and what are we craving after? So I'm wondering about this. If it doesn't divulge too many government secrets or maybe put anybody on blast or put anybody under the bus or flying over anybody or, buzzing the tower. But scariest moment for you in the cockpit was what?
Do you happen to remember a series from PBS back in 2008 called Carrier, where it chronicled the lives of the USS Nimitz?
No, I do remember the Nimitz, but I don't remember the PBS program.
So here's your homework, Neil, for later is go to YouTube or PBS or wherever and look for the series Carrier. And that crew came with us on my 2005 deployment, and it took them a couple of years to produce it. And it was basically like a reality show. So we went from San Diego out to Hawaii and Guam and into the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean and down to Perth and then back to Hawaii, picked up our Tigers and came home. But when we neared Perth, about 4 months into a 6-month deployment, we encountered some rough seas. And we decided to keep flying because the leadership on the carrier thinks that there is a perishable skill. And it's true, right? Just like a musician or an athlete, you have to practice. And so we flew in the daytime and the ship was really moving. I mean, it was heaving up and down. I don't mean moving through the water. It's always doing that. But it was bobbing up and down like a toy in your bathtub. And then, okay, that was fine because you've got peripheral vision and you can see because of the sun. And then that night we had our flight schedule and everyone's looking around at each other like, are we really going to go do this? Okay, I guess we are. And let me take a quick caveat, Neil. Gene Cernan, Apollo 17 astronaut, is famous for saying that, in his opinion, landing a high-performance fighter jet on an aircraft carrier at night was more difficult than landing on the moon. Having done over 260 night carrier landings, but never having landed on the moon, I can't say I agree, but I can tell you this. There's nothing more scary, dark, unnerving, uncomfortable, unpleasant than landing on a carrier at night in the first place. Add a little weather where you can't see the moon or the stars, and it gets even worse because it's so dark over the ocean. Most people have no idea. If you've ever gone camping and you see the beautiful stars because there's just no cultural lighting, that is something. There's no stars and there's no cultural lighting and you're flying in that void, your brain plays tricks on you. You don't know which way is right side up, upside down. And all of a sudden, oh good, there's a little light. It's a point of light and it's the carrier from 20 miles. Oh look, why are they upside down? Wait, am I upside down? No, I'm right side up. Okay, hold on, look at my instruments. You don't know. Your brain, it's almost like it's a kid, like a 3-year-old just waiting to run off at Disneyland whenever you turn your back for a second. Pretty sure my brain is not the only one that does this. So you have to convince yourself, okay, my instruments are correct. Here's the procedure. And I would talk to myself. I was single seat, but I would talk to myself. So then you get down there, again, in a perfect night with maybe even a little moon. It's not that easy. Have you ever seen an aircraft carrier? Like, have you been to the Midway or another actual carrier?
My dad was on the USS Peleliu, which was
Close. Yeah.
a helicopter carrier, but that's as close as I've ever gotten to an actual carrier.
Imagine you were strong enough to take an aircraft carrier and pick it up and turn it on its tail and stand it next to the Empire State Building. It's taller. Imagine you could measure the flight deck. It's 4.5 acres. You could put however many hundreds of houses, at least here where I live, they squeeze them in. 250 feet from the heel to the top. Above the water is about 200, I think, feet of that, maybe a little more. The flight deck itself is 60 feet off the water. It's an enormous ship. It displaces about 100,000 tons, which is is just a way of putting that's how much it weighs, because, right, the whole point of buoyancy is you have to displace the same amount of water as you weigh. It's a big, big ship. Most of the time when you're on it, you can't tell you're in the ocean. Every once in a while, like, oh, there's a little roll or a little heave. All right. So to put that in context, this particular night in October off of Perth.
Perth is in Australia, just to help geographically.
Yep, on the West Coast. So this particular day and night, the seas are such that the frequency and the displacement of the waves are moving the aircraft carrier from, let's call it zero and normal and no rough seas at all, where the back of the ship is going up 20 feet and down 20 feet. So it's 40-foot swings on this monstrous aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, the wires that I need to try to land in with my tailhook extended about 230-ish feet up from the back of the ship are also moving. Now they're close to the middle, so they shouldn't move as much. They're also moving. We as an air wing are coming down from our event, and now we're trying to land on this in already the toughest conditions of any aviation event anywhere, in my opinion. Now the wires are moving away from you, or the ship is coming up to try to hit you before you're ready or get away from you when you come down. What normally takes about 15 minutes for about 15 aircraft took over an hour. People kept boltering, as it's called, which is when you miss all the wires. And not only did we barely get one or two aircraft down and whittle away at those 15, we had to launch more aircraft because our most precious asset in naval aviation around the carrier is fuel. And the only way to get more fuel is to either divert to, say, Perth, to go join another aircraft that has a system where we can take more of its fuel. But even then, those anchor pilots had to land. So it took forever. First pass down, I didn't even touch the ship. The ship and I were so out of sync with my attempt to fly on the appropriate glide slope into the wires that I ended up just missing everything. The second time down, pretty rare, by the way. I'm not necessarily the best carrier pilot, but I could usually get aboard without too much fanfare in normal conditions, even at night. I missed everything. Second time down, hey, my wheels touched, but my hook missed all the wires. Third time down, thankfully, before I would have had to tank, caught the wire, came to a stop. The way we taxi or control an F-18 on the ground or on the flight deck is with our legs. We have brakes at the top of the rudder pedals, and then we steer left and right, similar to how you steer a car. We steer that with our feet, not with our hands like in a car. Your leg muscles, for most people, are also your largest muscles. So once your body is done with adrenaline, it wants to get rid of it, and it's going to use the biggest, most efficient muscle, which is your leg. That makes fine control of the aircraft very difficult. They taxi you right next to the edge, and they make these sharp turns. They want to park you very, very close because space is on a premium on the ship. And I'm trying to do all that. Meanwhile, the ship is still moving up and down, so I go too fast when I don't want to, not fast enough when I do, and my legs are shaking, and they're trying to say, hey, get over the edge. I say, no, I don't want to get close to the edge. Put me in the middle. I finally land. I finally park. I finally shut down. I go below decks. I say a quick prayer. I say, holy smokes. I walk into our ready room, which is like a big family's living room, and all the non-flying pilots start clapping. Now, there's a couple of us from that squadron airborne, and I'm one of the first or second down. I don't know. And they've been watching it on Danger TV, the little replay of the cameras in the ready room. And so they're all clapping. And meanwhile, here comes PBS and jams a camera in my face. Hey, what was that like? I'm like, holy smokes, who's got the whiskey? And, there's no alcohol on Navy ships. So I think I said something, I hope, a little bit coherent. That was the one part of my little 2 seconds of fame on that series. And I was just glad to be alive, Neil. So that was the most scared I've ever been in an airplane.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking of combat. I'm thinking of you're getting shot at. I'm thinking of maybe you had to eject over enemy lines like Owen Wilson. Oh, you're behind enemy lines. I mean, that's what I'm envisioning, not touching down.
They did a study in Vietnam of A-6 intruder pilots, and they put heart rate monitors on them. And those guys were getting it done. I mean, they were doing low altitude bombing, getting shot at, getting shot down. And I, by the way, never ejected. They came back, and their heart rate when they analyzed it later was highest on the carrier landing at night.
I think that's crazy. I've landed at night, again, in a commercial airplane, not obviously in a jet. Even that, I'm like, I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, we were flying back from San Francisco to Oregon. We had just come from Orlando, and there were a lot of fires going on in our area, a lot of fires during that summer. And I remember flying over and looking down and just my heart just breaking as I looked out the window of seeing just my state on fire. It was dark and all you could see was the flames. And I'm like, it made me forget about flying for a moment and think about somebody on the ground. I love the fact that you said once you got on the ground, you were so grateful and you were thankful. What was it like for your family when you were up in the air? Were they ever nervous for you? Were they ever just scared for you? Or how did you calm the family back at home, their nerves while you were up in the air?
Well, like I said, I had two older brothers who just thought everything I did was amazing. They never felt the fear of it, I don't think. And I would share stories with them that I would not, frankly, share with our mother or my wife. Of course, as long as I was the one telling them and not someone on my behalf, they were fine with that. And of course, the two of them did have a chance. I mentioned the word tigers earlier, not on the '05 deployment, but on 2003 deployment. My two brothers met me in Hawaii and spent the last week of our deployment going back. And boy, we had a great time. So they got to see flight operations, including at night. So they really built a new appreciation for it. My mother, I think, was obviously the most nervous as far as told me later. She was always worried about the black sedan showing up at her door. Tried to assuage her that I was well trained and careful. And yes, there were risks, but they were managed risks. If something happens, I want you to know that this is the life I chose and I'm okay with it. I don't want to die. I think prepared, and I would have a will usually and everything else. Whenever I went on deployment, I would tell my wife, hey, this is what you need to know if something happens. And here's a list of accounts. And here's what I'd like done with different personal effects. So we met on St. Patrick's Day when I was not even in flight school yet. She was on spring break and I was waiting in Pensacola, Florida. It's a great story. And I remember like, oh yeah, you don't want to get involved with me. I'm going to be a fighter pilot, pretending to dismiss it and really trying to build some hype. Like, oh really? When we started seriously dating, I just said to her, I said, look, if we're going to get serious, you need to know that we're going to move a lot. We won't always be near family. To this day, she's really like the only one that left her area of Northwest Arkansas. Things happen. Bad things happen. I used to wear a little tribute on the back of my helmet, Neil, as a little, just like I said, tribute to the people I personally knew who perished in this business. And the number got up to 16 by the end of my career. I just tried to tell her, I hope nothing happens. It does. The same thing I told my mom. Oh, by the way, you're young and attractive. You can mourn for a little while, but then get on with your life because you shouldn't be alone the rest of your life. She never liked that part of the discussion. Impress upon her that I do want someone else to take care of you and you take care of him.
There's one thing to fly in combat, which let me tell you, I mean, that's got to be just a surreal feeling already. But there's another thing now post 9/11, flying commercial. I think it's a flip of the coin. What would be more intense, and again, you don't seem like a guy for the dramatics. That seems to be just as intense again, flying commercial or flying in combat. Both have their risks. You don't ever worry about nowadays what happened on 9/11, the hijacking and all that. And again, I know we're not trying to get political per se.
I mean, look, people studied our system and looked for weaknesses, found them and exploited them on 9/11. And it's a huge tragedy, obviously, for those involved and those affected by it, which is many more than just those who died, both in America and overseas. Absolutely unfortunate. It's history at this point. So what have we learned? Our PSA and our security is tighter. Our processes are better. Our screening, I hope, is better. Pilots are trained better. Now, a certain number of them can be enrolled in a certain procedure that allows them to do certain things to defend themselves in a law enforcement style. And we also have different and better locks on our doors, which they're trying to do a second now. That's working its way through Congress. They'd like to have a second barrier. I think we're more aware of it. At the time, nobody really thought of, there was hijackings, sure, through the 80s and everything else. And it was always, okay, we want a bunch of people released and a bunch of money and a helicopter, get out of here. Well, nobody ever thought of, I don't think, using them as a weapon just for the sake of terrorism. Yeah, we're a different world now. If I can address your point, when I fly in a commercial capacity, I'm not going to say I'm lackadaisical. I think the chances now of something happening are very low. I keep my guard up and I try to be the best possible airline pilot I can be, whether it's knowing that there could be an emergency with a system malfunction or medical emergency of one of the passengers or a nefarious act from passengers. I just accept that the chances are low. If it happens, well, then it's my turn. And what does that mean? Am I going to make it? Am I not? And if I'm not, well, what's the way I can make it the least bad for everybody? I don't say that lightly. I'm 53 years old, Neil. I'm not ready necessarily to die. Again, I ride motorcycles. I fly airplanes. I do a lot of things that I'm used to risk, and I just manage them. I don't avoid them.
Does faith play a role in you as a pilot?
Absolutely.
How so?
So I'm a Christian, and I'm not real outspoken about it not because I don't have good faith, although I have my doubts. I think any probably Christian does. I don't know. It's got such an interesting schema these days, negativity about if you're a Christian, you're going to try to save me. Well, I mean, certainly the Bible tells us to, go to the corners of your city and your state and your country and all the people in all the world. I probably, when the time comes and I've got to answer for my deeds one way or the other, probably will be one where my report card is not as good. And I also try to make it more a function of, well, hold on, what's going on with him? Why is he that? Me coming to you, Neil, and saying, hey, are you saved? You should be. Is maybe you coming to me and saying, hey, you seem pretty comfortable and confident and usually happy. I'm not great at any of those or all of those all the time. Never miss a chance. Preach the gospel when necessary. Use words. I'm more of the first one than the second one. I'd Fanini or somebody. Anyway, I'd like people to know that this is a belief I have. If they don't, that's okay. We can still get along. And yes, the Bible takes a very strong stand on sin, and it names a lot of different kinds of sins, including homosexuality. It also talks about lust and greed and all these other things. Yeah, I mean, right now, there's a lot of talk about, oh, well, then you don't like homosexuals. That's not the issue at all. I don't like sin. I hate my own sin. And if you have sin, I'm not going to sit here and cast judgment about it, whatever it is. It's a hard thing. It's such a hot button topic that I tend to keep it to myself. And I hope that maybe someone will ask me about it someday, and maybe I can be a source of inspiration to them. But evangelizing has not been necessarily one of my strongest suits.
I guess I bring that up because I think about a lonely night in the cockpit. As you said, you were a single seater most of your flying career.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talk about talking to yourself. Maybe there's a prayer moment. And then you even talked about when you did that night landing that probably scared the bejesus out of you, that you went downstairs and said a prayer. So I thought, there's something there. I'm only speaking from a dependent standpoint. I know when my dad was gone, I mean, that was some of the scariest moments that I remember as a kid. And again, he wasn't in a plane. He was searching a minefield, or he was sitting on a helipad waiting for the phone call that never came or maybe would come. Think about that. I asked my dad one time, I said, Dad, do you believe in Jesus? And he goes, well, yeah, of course. We got him when we left boot camp. All the Marines do. And I just had to laugh at that. And I said, but what does that mean to you? And so he could never truly articulate it. He did say, well, I know him, and I know I love him, and I hope I get to meet him. To me as a pilot, some of the things that you've encountered, some of the things that you've witnessed, I mean, there's got to be a moment where you just look out of the cockpit, whether it may be a sunrise or a sunset, and you think, man, there has got to be a creator.
No, you hit it on the head there, Neil. So we don't fly during very many sunrises. There were times when we would launch from the carrier in the daytime, and then we would wait for our mission to land after it was truly dark. And so the nice part about that is you get to be up while the sun is setting. And of course, it sets a little later up high. I would sit up there and just say, this is as close to heaven as you can get. I mean, look at these clouds, look at that sun, look at the ocean. And the cool thing about that, it was a very personal experience. I mean, I didn't have a burning bush experience. I didn't hear God say, hey, Vincent, you're going to get a good pass this landing or not or whatever. It was just one of those spiritual moments where I thought, I'm the only one seeing this. Can I say then that absolutely there is a God? No, I have faith that there is. And if I'm wrong, oh well, that's the faith I have. And I hope others find something that they have faith in. Look, everyone has faith in something. Every time you sit in a chair, you have faith that's not going to just collapse on you. Choose to have that because of my upbringing. And I know it's not for everyone, but it certainly comforts me. Yes, I haven't done that in a while. And every once in a while, I do see something good from the flight deck of an airliner. Of course, there's somebody with you there. I feel closest to God now when I'm out in nature. I talked about fly fishing earlier, and I had a trip, like I said, in September where I was just off on my own, and I just was like, this is amazing. Thank you. Expression I love. Some men go to church and dream of fishing. Others go fishing and dream of God. That is one of my favorites. I don't need to go sit in a building shoulder to shoulder with people, although we're encouraged to. My church is outdoors. That's where I go to worship.
Who made the greatest impact for you in the Navy?
It's a good question, Neil. I'm not sure I've been asked that one before because I'm sitting here rapidly scanning through my catalog of memories. And the sad truth is there's not one clear right answer. In my first squadron, we had a new pilot show up fresh from Top Gun. His name was Jeff Winter, immersed himself in our squadron as the training officer. And once we got to know each other, he said to me, Jell-O, you should Jell-O's my call sign. He says, you should think about going to Top Gun. Long story short, because of him, I did. And because of him, they accepted me. Turned out to be the high water mark of my career. I was subsequently not later selected to be a commanding officer of a squadron, which is a bummer. And a lot of good people are selected for that. So it was a bit of a lick to not be selected. So as I look back at my 25-year career, but also everything we accomplished at Top Gun and I accomplished personally, I would say that is the high water mark of my career. And he and I remain friends. Yeah, I would say maybe him from the point of view of that he guided me at a time when it was a big fork in the road. Once you have been trained, and then you get to the fleet, and in my case, it was VFA 86. That's the name of the squadron. And then when you get done with that about 3 years later, now it's time to make a decision where you go. And some people go to, let's say, test pilot school or back to the training and teach young pilots or to Top Gun for graduate level tactics or do other things. I'm glad that he came along and directed me. I'm not sure I would have found that and done that on my own.
I've yet to meet a person that gets there on their own. It's nice every now and then to look back and think, man, without so-and-so or without this moment, maybe I'm not where I am. Well, speaking of your show, we've talked about it a kind of a roundabout sort of way. We've hovered around it, or we've flown around it, or we've buzzed I don't know. I'm running out of analogies. How can someone go and listen to what you're about? And maybe if somebody wants to connect on a deeper level away from this conversation, how can folks do that?
I have the Fighter Pilot podcast. We call it the Internet Show show that explores the fascinating world of air combat, the aircraft, the weapon systems, and most importantly, the people. And that really is true because you can read about facts and figures online. When we have people on, like our recent guest, Kurt Dose, who was an F-4 pilot in Vietnam, in fact, was engaged in air-to-air combat and downed a MiG-21, which killed the pilot. And when he was in my studio talking about his 2016 return trip to Vietnam, when he and some other Navy American pilots met some Vietnamese pilots and they shared stories. And in some cases, he and his buddies had killed some of their buddies and some of them had killed some of his buddies. It's heartwarming to know that the human element of this whole thing, this big ugly thing of military and combat and everything else, can be so incredible. And in fact, he ended up meeting the family of the pilot he killed and they reconciled. They said, "We have lost our son, but now we have you." And the mayor of the little city where they live renamed the street in front of that family's house to be the last names of both of those two people. I enjoy talking with guests about aircraft that I don't know anything about, the SR-71 or F-22. Boy, when you hear stories like that, it just really gives you hope for humanity. And I enjoy hosting the show. It can be found anywhere podcasts are available. We also have a very vibrant YouTube channel. We pivoted to video. We kind of took a page from Joe Rogan and we have folks come in the studio and we record the video and then we release an audio version of it also. It's a lot of fun. Seems to impact people. I hear from people all the time, young and old, who like the show. And that's heartwarming because it does make a little money and that's great, but it really makes a difference in people's lives and that's even better.
Yeah, I think anytime you can have a lasting impact, I think that's where it's at. When someone says, "Hey man, that show changed me," or "that guest swapped my perspective," or made me think differently, those are definitely the ones I look forward to as well. So yeah, that's awesome, man. So we'll definitely link that in our show notes. I like to do some silliness at the end of the show as well. So you seem like a silly kind of guy. I don't know.
I have my moments.
Well, I need you to pick a number 1 through 6. 1
4.
through 6. Number 4. Why'd you pick 4?
That was my water polo number in high school.
Here's our question. It's our silliness. What do you love/dislike most about flying? So what do you love and/what do you dislike about flying?
Well, so can I ask the context? Are we talking military or civil or just flying in general?
I'm just going to let you interpret that how you interpret that.
Can I love more than one thing about it and rattle off a couple?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the views. I love the fact that you can get somewhere faster than you can driving, generally speaking. I love the freedom of it. The fact that it's a particular activity that for the most part, present company excluded, apparently, Neil, brings joy to people. I cannot imagine being a police officer. I respect peace officers and police officers. I appreciate that there are people that do it, but I feel like they're surrounded by negativity all the time. And I don't know how they deal with that. In aviation, for the most part, you deal with the joy of flying. And so that's a good thing. What I dislike about it now in my current capacity is having to commute to get to work. I choose to live in San Diego. Now I'm Los Angeles based and it's a pain to get up there because of traffic. A huge fan of the fact that as a society, our societal norms and values and the way we treat each other are declining. And I see it all the time, every day. And that's not fun. There's that. It's very expensive. Aviation fuel is expensive. Mishaps are, generally speaking, fairly unforgiving. Some exceptions. If you crash, you're probably not going to do too well. That's not great. I love the fact that crashes are so infrequent, you rarely hear about them. They're more frequent in small airplanes than general aviation. I love the fact that I've been afforded the opportunity to do it throughout my adult life and enjoy it, make a difference, serve, which is one of my love languages, probably my biggest, to be able to serve in the military and serve people, and that I am able to make a living doing it as well, and a good living. We're quite comfortable, and my family still enjoys travel privileges because of it.
I think of so many great artists that got on a plane and died. John Denver, Jim Croce, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, the Big Bopper. Every now and then when I get on my plane, I'm like, okay, is this the moment? But what I'm hearing you say is that's pretty infrequent. And I should just rest assured, put my trust in the pilot and go.
Well, so for example, you did not hear about the time that I flew Charles Barkley on my airplane and he got there where he was going just fine. I also flew Jerome Bettis on my airplane. He got where he was going just fine. Time my family and my brother's family and I were going to Hawaii, and Willie Nelson was in first class as we walked past to get to our seats. We all got to Hawaii just fine. I've been close enough to slap LeBron James on the rear end and say good game as I flew him and the Lakers somewhere. We all got there just fine. So you don't hear about all the uneventful stuff. You hear about the sensational and the salacious and the unfortunately tragic. Look, we all need to be ready for what day. We don't know the time or the hour. It's going to come. And if it's in an airplane, well, so be it. It could be in your car. It could be on my motorcycle. It could be in the bed, which happens for a lot of people. You just don't wake up. I think you need to be ready. I think you need to take care of your household affairs, and the people who need forgiveness need to be forgiven, and the people who need to know that you love them need to be told. In my case, I've got a little to-do list right here. My wife and I recently established a trust, and we renewed our wills, and I need to write a letter to my oldest brother, who's the executor, to say, hey, if I'm gone and you're reading this, here's everything you need to know. So I'm not quite all the way there yet, and I hope he never gets to read it. I think you need to be prepared, and I think aviation is just another activity that we humans have figured out. It's not risk-free, but those risks are mitigated, and I feel like that may be the one theme I keep coming back to here, Neil.
Yeah, and I love that. Well, I want to say, man, thank you so much for the time that you gave us. I appreciate you taking time out of your day away from all of your activities to spend some moments with us.
I enjoy doing it because, for the reasons I said earlier, I feel like this is an act of service, and if it's valuing you and your listeners, then I'm glad to do it.
Well, again, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time. Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, we're off and running. As I often say when I tee off when I'm playing golf, we're off and running. I'm not sure why. We've taken off. We are in season 16 now. Yeah, I know the gummy bear story, it forever haunts me. Wondering about you, what is forever haunting you right now? What is that moment in your life that maybe you need to break free from the ground and really rise and soar? There's that great ride at Disneyland, Soarin'. For those of you who have been to Disneyland and even Disney World, it's an amazing ride. It's the closest I probably ever got to piloting anything other than the Top Gun ride back in Paramount days. I want you to think about that this week as we get out of here, and that's this, is what's something you really need to soar and leave and take off from and not be grounded any longer. Nobody wants to be grounded. Nobody puts baby in the corner, and nobody wants to be grounded. We all want to fly. We all want to soar. So think about that. Let me know. I'd love to hear. OPSpodcast.com is a great place to let me know. You can let us know on the socials at OPS Podcast Show on our Facebook, Instagram, X, and Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days. And of course, don't forget this. Remember, don't ever forget. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.